Hey, what's going on out there? I'm Sean Devine. I hope y'all are doing great this week. Very inspired. Today I want to do a new tutorial, and this one's by request. I've had a couple of different requests to kind of go through my approach and just thought processes in making my drums and putting together drum patterns. And I want to give you 5 tips today that are going to help you to make more interesting drum patterns, to make patterns that are more natural, just more exciting and more original. Working in beat-driven genres, loop-driven genres like hip-hop, urban, even EDM and some dance type of genres, the drums can become monotonous and they can sound very similar to a lot of tracks out there. So these tips are going to just give you some new life in your drum and percussion patterns. So let's jump right in, and I'm going to play back this track. And this one is just a good example of all the things I'm going to talk about, and we'll just base it off of that. So let me just let you hear the drums that are in this beat right now. All right, so let me mute a lot of the music. Let's just solo all the drum stuff so we've got a little bit better idea of what's going on. So just playing it right there, you can tell there's a lot of movement in the drums, and there's a lot more going on than maybe you listen on first take. You know, with all the music going, you really are hearing mostly the kick, the snare, the hi-hats, you know, the main upfront elements. But part of the way we create all of the interest in the drums and the movement is adding these subtle things. So the first thing I want to talk about is adding live, quote, live drums and acoustic sounds to your drums. And what this does is it just makes your programmed drums sound more authentic. It gives them more movement and flavor, and it just really helps move things along. So in this track, I've got a couple of different live elements, and we have some live hi-hats. Let me just play those back. Very simple, just 8-note hi-hat. But the cool thing about live drums and live elements and adding these into your beats is there's a very human element to these drums. So if you listen back, the velocities are changing, the sound of the hi-hat as the velocity changes are responding. I mean, it just sounds very natural. So by the time we put that with our kicks and snares, it's just creating a hybrid sound of programmed drums and a live drummer, and that's what we're going for. Okay, so building on that thought, let me show you a quick way that we can add live or live sampled drums in the form of hi-hats to this main groove to give it more of a human feel. I do this a lot of times. I'll pull up a program like we have here, which is Easy Drummer or SSD drums, any kind of live sampled drum kit, and just use the hi-hats. Because the cool thing about the samples with these types of programs is that they're very dynamic based on how you play on the keyboard, or if you want to trigger them even with an actual drum kit, you can. So it just sounds a lot more human versus playing an 808 hi-hat where it's like every single hit is the exact same. So this is just going to give it more of a human flair. So let me just play something back as I would as a drummer, just to kind of give you a feel of how this changes the groove a little bit. So there you go. I mean, you can just hear how there's so much more variation, and I could use this pattern and just play it throughout, and it's going to be evolving and very much more live and human. So there's a quick tip for you. Try that out. Try some different types of hi-hats. Number 2, don't quantize all of your programmed drums. That's just kind of like the automatic reaction, is just to set this quantize to 1/16 or whatever and just leave it on all your tracks and quantize everything. But the quickest way to kind of kill your drums in a lot of senses is to quantize things that you shouldn't quantize. I mean, there are genres out there and certain styles where things need to be very locked to the grid. I mean, a trap beat with hi-hats, 808 hats, or, you know, an EDM beat, like the kick needs to be absolutely on the downbeats, right? But for things that need a little bit of movement, and like a track like this, you want to create more of that live feel, don't quantize everything. So right now, these hi-hats, you know, we didn't quantize them at all. This is just how I played it. And, you know, some of the notes, if we go in here and look, I mean, they're not right on. See, I'm a little bit off the grid on some stuff, a little early, a little late. And what that does is creates a human feel. And that's what we're trying to do a lot of times in music, is leave in more of that human feel. I mean, these days with everything being so programmed and so like locked to the grid, timing wise, I think it's really refreshing to hear drum tracks that have a little bit of this movement in them, especially loop-based genres like hip-hop and everything else. So a lot of times when you hear a beat and you've got like that pocket, but it just feels human, it feels right. It's because on the MPC, you know, a lot of people will leave quantize off on their hi-hat, or they might do a snare that's slightly late or slightly early, and that's what creates the pocket. So it's not about getting everything perfect, because sometimes that can ruin things. I mean, let's say I quantize this hi-hat. That's not so bad because we're still preserving the velocity with that. And as you can see, I mean, my velocity changed up quite a bit, and it's very dynamic, so that feels pretty good, but it still loses something when I quantize it like that, I think. And obviously there's cases where that's going to be more noticeable. But anyway, just don't quantize everything. And a lot of times what you can do is, let's take off this kick up here, and let's just record something real quick. I'll just re-record it. Something like that. So obviously my timing wasn't perfect on that. I'm just kind of doing it real sloppy on purpose. But if we go up here, cool thing about Logic is right now, you can just hear, I mean, this note is really, really late. And what I like to do is you can adjust the strength of the quantize, which this is really useful because we can, instead of quantizing everything exactly, you know, to perfect timing, we can say take, you know, this percentage of my performance and mix it with the quantized signal. So let's just try and do like maybe 70. So it still gives you a little bit of the groove, but you maintain the tightness and the human feel. So that's, again, another tip. When you're going to quantize stuff, use things like Logic's quantize strength. You've also got quantize swing, which you can look up exactly what that does, but there's all different types of things that we can do. You can quantize length, velocity, changing up all these different things to make it to where the quantize is effective, but it's not so robotic. That's the goal here, right? Number 3, we're going to layer our drums with loops to create texture. And I'm going to show you how to do this effectively, but let's just go into this beat right now and I'll show you some examples of how this is used. So let me mute some of these here so we can focus. Okay, so if I play this back, that's just our program drums. Now what we did was, and I do this a lot, is we added a couple of loops and layered them underneath. So they're not, right up front, and we're not using the loop as the main drums, but layered and creating texture. They give you a lot of movement and they're going to make your drums more unique and more evolving, more interesting. So we've got this loop right here, and let's listen to that back just by itself if we can. So it's just like a kick, hi-hat, and a snare, and they're just filtered. I just EQ'd all the lows off and just boosted a little bit of the highs, but it's just creating some texture and some movement. So then when we play it back, oops, let me mute this. Gives it a really cool flavor. We've also got another percussion loop under here. If you're curious about what types of loops and kind of how to layer things properly and what you're looking for, let's just talk about how we can do that and what the best way to approach that is. I have a Nerve plugin pulled up, and what this does is it just triggers loops and locks them to time. It's really useful if you're going to use loops in this way. And then I have just some of my custom loops from the 336 kit, and I'll show you how we can layer these. So what I usually will do is I'll just play it back, and unless I've got something in mind in terms of the groove already picked out, I'll just kind of go through them and see what's going to work. But the first thing that we want to do is just go ahead and filter off the lows from this loop, because with these we're just creating a texture, and we're going to really just be using the mids and the highs. Very rarely would I use the low end from a loop like this when we're just creating texture. So we'll just roll those off, and then I'm just going to play them back. All right, so really quickly, this is just, going through the 336 loops. These are pretty cool, but this is a Vox loop that I just recorded. It's just me going, and so this already sounds like something. And we could go in here and we could further, roll off some highs. And then let's play that back with our other loops. You can see how much that did for it, and the power of just layering these and putting, maybe even 3 or 4 of these. But the important thing is like rolling off these highs and lows. You want to make sure that there's not so much going on that it takes away from the main like kick and snare groove. This is just meant to build on it and add that texture. So just be really careful about how much you add, and don't make your drums, so busy that they don't sound natural and it's hard to kind of catch the groove. So again, use these loops. It's a really powerful way of making your program drums sound more interesting. Number 4, we're going to create a lot of variation in our different tracks and within the pattern. And we're also going to use drum fills to strengthen the arrangement of the beat and also keep things interesting as you're evolving throughout the track. So we might have a drum fill go from our verse to our hook, or out of the hook into a verse or into a bridge. It really just helps those transitions a lot. So one thing I want to point out is that when you're making beats, if you're getting into Logic or Pro Tools or whatever DAW you're using, a lot of us will just set a cycle or a loop, and we might set it to 4 bars or 8 bars, and we just start laying down our initial kind of like drum rhythm idea. And this is fine, but what happens is usually you'll lay down a pattern and you've only been sitting there listening to it for a little while, and you're like, oh, this is cool, so I'm just going to copy and paste. I'll just loop it throughout the track. And then some of you may use that for the entire beat, and that can get really monotonous. So what I recommend is making your cycle or your loop that you're starting to record in, make that longer. So make that 16 bars or maybe even 32 bars, so that your kick and snare pattern that you're recording, it's going to evolve and change throughout the pattern. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need familiarity. You need to, make sure that the rhythm stays consistent, but it's okay to have, little variations in your kick or your snare or your hi-hat throughout, just to keep it interesting and keep things evolving. Now, as far as fills, we have one at the end of this bar right here. So I'm going to play that back, and then I'll talk about what we did. So it's really simple. It's just, and then we have a little roll in there, a drum roll. So let me unmute or unsolo these, and then I'll show you. We've got that big clap, which is just a clap with a big reverb on it, and that just leads us out of the verse going into the hook there. So that's all that is. Now we've got a little drum roll. It's just a snare, just a couple of ghost notes. And it's just like a chop break. You can hear a little bit of a cymbal, but it's just that little ghost note roll on the snare. And then the kick and the snare drum just switch up a little bit. So it's just like, which is, more like something you would hear with a live drummer. So just doing little fills like this in your patterns, it makes a huge, huge difference. And also one thing to mention is that if you're not comfortable creating fills and you don't really know how to approach drums in general, the same way that you would study, music theory or go in and learn chords or do any of those types of things to strengthen your beats, with drums, you're going to need to study some real drummers. I mean, get out and listen to funk drummers, soul drummers, rock drummers. Listen to the patterns and the fills and get familiar with how they use them for transitions, because the best way to learn how to program drums is to understand how they need to sound from a drummer's perspective and how you're going to make them sound natural. I mean, a lot of times you'll hear drum patterns that are just not realistic at all. Like you wouldn't play them behind a drum kit that way, and that's fine. But it really does just add a unique and authentic groove when you just know how the drums are actually supposed to be programmed. So anyway, check into that and use fills and just build as much variation as possible in your pattern. Okay, so finally, number 5, this is use velocity to strengthen your patterns, give them more variation, and make them more human. That's the goal, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute this kick again, and I'm going to record a new pattern. I'm going to show you how we can use velocity to really strengthen this. So let's just work with that. Let me load that up. Now, as you can see, everything's pretty much at 100. I did this on purpose. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to use velocity here to make the kick drum pattern more human. And again, like I was just talking about with adding fills and all that type of stuff, if you know the way a drummer plays the drums, when you have a kick drum, like those kick hits, they're not all going to be 100% smack on. So a lot of you get on your MPC pads or whatever, you put on full velocity and every note is the same velocity. So what we got to do is figure out, how would a real drummer play this programmed drum pattern. So if we play this kickback, let me just mute all of our solo all of our drums again. So let's use our quantize trick here. Let's just do maybe like a 70% quantize just to tighten it a little bit. See, this note's not playing, so let's do 100 on that. Okay, right there, this is a perfect example. So a real drummer, when he plays this, it's gonna be these two notes. Okay, so this one right here would be at full. But the note right before that, it'd be like da-dum, dum. So that one's a little bit softer. It's like boom, da-dum, dum, dum. You know what I mean? So it's just adding a little bit of a groove. Maybe a little less. And let's reduce some of these. Boom, boom. See, it makes a big difference when you hear that one. And let's say at the end of this, he's just going to get softer to louder on the kick. Or maybe it was like dum, 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 dum. Let's try that. Something like that, but you get the idea. We can use velocity to make things really more human and more interesting, especially with kick drums, snare drums. Sometimes you need like a little softer hit on the kick or the snare just to create that rhythm. So don't be so stuck in setting everything to full velocity, full level on your drums, and it's just like the hardest smack possible, because that's just not the way real drums would work, and it sounds better to create a little variation. So try this out. Just make things more human, make things more unpredictable. That's the whole goal of this video, is just to show you some ways that you can really catch your listeners off guard in a good way, rhythmically, and make things just sound more authentic, more exciting, and just add some flavor to your rhythm. So I hope this helps y'all. If you have any questions about what I showed you in the video or otherwise, feel free to leave it below. And if you learn anything, please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.